Hi everyone, welcome back to the Latodami Nature Center. We're here again for another virtual Thursday hike. So on today's hike, we're going to learn about some really cool different plants. We're going to start here at the Nature Center and we're going to end up at our apple orchard. So if you just want to come along, you can join me on this hike today. So first up, we're going to talk about greater celandine. So that's this little guy right down here. This is greater celandine. So right now it doesn't have a flower, but come about May, it's going to have a really cute yellow flower that blooms. But that's not the most interesting part about this plant right here. My favorite part about the greater celandine is its yellow sap. So it has this latexy-like sap that is yellow, and it kind of does leave a little bit of pigment. If you were to put it on your skin, it would last for maybe an hour. But it dates back a really long time in a lot of different folklore. So as far back as 90 AD, it was said that mother birds used to drop the sap of the celandine into the eyes of their blind fledglings to cure their vision. So this led to the belief that is still held true today, that celandine helps cure vision, it helps with clear eyes, but it also has many other claims that it maybe clears liver disease, it can help cure toothaches, leprosy, and even cancer. So these are a lot of claims. Some of them are really unsubstantiated. It does have antibacterial properties, but other than that, it's really just the cool story that brings people into this plant. Here I am standing in a patch of stinging nettle, and just like poison ivy, this is a plant you really want to get to know because it doesn't have the best sensation when you come in contact with it. So stinging nettle is covered with little hairs called trichomes, and what these hairs do is when they're brushed up against, they actually expose a hollow tube-like needle, and this needle injects you with formic acid and histamine. So that's what causes kind of an itchy burning sensation, and it can leave a rash for up to 12 hours. So although this plant is pretty annoying to humans, it actually has some great benefits. People do eat it. The early leaves you can eat, and it is a great source of vitamin A, vitamin C, and calcium, but it is also one of the only larval food plants for the red admiral butterfly. So it's a really important plant for wildlife, just like poison ivy, but we don't really like to come in contact with it too much. So here I'm standing underneath of an oak tree. This is a shingle oak to be exact. And you may wonder why this oak and many oaks like it are holding on to their leaves this time of year. Because we know deciduous trees are supposed to lose their leaves in the fall, right? That's what really distinguishes a deciduous from an evergreen tree. But this tree is holding on to its leaves because of something called marcescence. So this is a theory that trees like this, maybe the younger trees, the ones that are lower in the understory, hold on to their leaves to kind of use them as a fertilizer for the next growing season so they can jumpstart their life cycle. So what happens is these trees hold on to their leaves, and then come the spring they push them out when there's new leaves underneath, and then those leaves fall to the ground, they decompose, and they return their nutrients to the soil. So when they return their nutrients to the soil, it kind of acts like a fertilizer for that young tree, and it just goes ahead and jumpstarts its growing season. So it kind of gets a one-up on the other trees that are in the forest that decided to shed their leaves in the fall. So you may have noticed all these crazy looking growths that are covering this oak tree right here. And you may think maybe that's a fungus or a bacteria, but what that is it's actually the response of the tree to a wasp depositing her eggs in the stem. So what the wasp does is she has this really sharp appendage on her body. She slits the stem of the tree and she deposits her eggs. So the tree, in response to this, kind of grows around and creates this tumor-like growth on the stem. And if you do go ahead and slice this thing open, sometimes you'll find that wasp inside. And many birds, like our chickadees, know that because you'll often find these galls completely covered by holes, and that is from our chickadees going ahead and pecking these open and trying to find those little midges that are inside. So unfortunately in this one, I do not see a larva, but oftentimes you will find those guys, and sometimes people like to use them for fly fishing. So if that's your thing, you can go ahead and try it. It is a lot of work though, just for a tiny little insect. You may notice this grass, this dead grass that's covering the landscape over here, and that's not just us ignoring our landscaping duties. This actually is Japanese stiltgrass. So just like Japanese barberry that we talked about in last hike, this is an invasive plant. So just like I said last time, an invasive plant is something that comes from another country. It has no natural control and it causes harms to the environment. So the reason that Japanese stiltgrass fits this description is because it's from Japan, and because it's from Japan, it has no natural control, meaning that it has nothing that's accustomed and adapted to eating it. So because of that, there's nothing keeping its population under control, and it just goes absolutely crazy and takes over everything that it can. Because it's non-native, our native animals here are not used to eating it, so they will not control it at all. They will not take care of this stuff. And like I said, it takes out all the room for those native plants to grow and flourish. So the crazy thing about stiltgrass is that it reproduces so quickly because it produces a gigantic seed bank in the fall. And these seeds can fall into the ground and actually stay viable in the soil for many years. So if you have a stiltgrass problem and you're trying to eradicate it and you think you've pulled all the grass that you can, you may notice this stuff coming back year after year after year because those seeds still remain in the soil. So this is something that you just have to really keep your eye on and continue to control. But large patches like this usually need like an herbicide treatment or even fire to get rid of this plant completely. So this is just another one of those invasives that is really threatening this health and safety of our landscapes in Pennsylvania. We are currently standing on Wagon Wheel Trail, and as you're walking down this trail, you might notice some evidence of some really old buildings that had at one time laid on this property. So if you didn't already know, Latodami Nature Center was at one time an active dairy barn. So this property was acquired in 1969, making this our 51st year as a nature center. But in 1914 was when this really all was a poppin' barn. So it was a really active farm, and they had all kinds of different animals. And over here is where they had a turkey pen, and then over here is where they had a pigsty. So you could still see evidence of this area being used for farming. And the reason that these enclosures were kept so far away from the home is that they had a really nasty smell. So if you come to the nature center and you notice that we're kind of far from the barn and maybe the house and the mansion, that's because they didn't really want to live too close to these stinky animals. So we found ourselves standing in another wetland, and on our last virtual hike, we talked about all the really important benefits of wetlands to humans, but we didn't talk about how awesome they are and how much they're teeming with life. So just where I'm standing, you can see there's a lot of different wildflowers that bloom in wetlands. We have dogbane, we have some monkey flower, and we have some ironweed, which currently are not in bloom, but it's really cool to learn these flowers when they're not in bloom during kind of their winter, early spring stages, so that you know to come back and look for them when they are in bloom later. So also in wetlands are cattails, and cattails are regarded as one of the best survival plants. It was said by a naturalist once that if you give me a problem, I could try to solve it with cattails. So one of the great things about cattails in survival is that if you found cattails, they're a wetland indicator. So that means that you've also found water. So you already checked that one off your list. But also you can eat every single part of the plant. So you can boil the roots, you can make starch from the roots, you can make flour from the seed pod, which is this crazy hot dog looking thing at the top. And they actually did do that in World War II. They made flour out of the seeds. So, but the other amazing thing about cattails is that these really cool seed pods right here, which are totally soaked, so they're not going to show you that awesome wind dispersal method that they have as well as they would when they're dry, but they are an awesome fire starter. So if you're in a situation where you need to build a fire, all you got to do is break one of these guys off and you can go ahead and light that and it'll just go up in flames. There are such great fire starters that Native Americans did used to use them as torches. So if you found cattails, you're going to be in an okay situation if you maybe are struggling out in the environment. Here's another really cool wetland plant, and this is the fertile frond of a sensitive fern. So I know you're probably like, what is a fertile frond? Well, it's actually just one of the life stages of a fern. So unlike flowering plants, which reproduce through seeds, ferns reproduce through spores. So what this is basically just a spore capsule of a fern. So ferns have two different kinds of fronds. They have the sterile frond and they have the fertile frond. The sterile frond, we just don't see at this time of year because it's a little too early. That's the green part of the fern that does all the photosynthesizing and it does not have the spores underneath. But this right here is the fertile frond. So all that is a bunch of spores that'll tangle up in this crazy little plant right here. And it will eventually lead to just putting off all those spores that are out there and then lead to the growth of new ferns. So this is different from something like those fiddleheads that we see also this time of year. Fiddleheads are those crazy little curled up things that turn into new ferns, but those are not what this is. This is before the fiddlehead. This is the spore. So you will see these this type of year and maybe think it's some alien looking creature, just like those skunk cabbages that we talked about last time. But nope, it's just one of the life stages of the fern. I'm standing under one of the trees that you may encounter when you come to North Park, and that is the hawthorn tree. So they're called the hawthorn because of these crazy long spikes that are all along their stems. And these spikes are really useful for the tree because they help keep away large herbivores like deer, but there is an animal that uses these thorns to their advantage, and that is the northern shrike. So we do have the northern shrike in our region, and the reason that this bird will use the hawthorn tree is because they don't really have talons. Although they are insect and even small mammal eaters, they do not have talons that allow them to really rip apart and eat that animal. So what they do is they use the thorns on the hawthorn tree to impale insects and even mice and just have them hanging there. So there are stories of people coming across hawthorn trees and finding a little insect graveyard. It's a pretty gruesome scene, I would imagine, but I think it would be pretty cool to come across. And they're also known to eat the monarch butterfly, which we know to be poisonous, right? But it takes about 3 days for the poison to break down in the monarch butterfly after it dies. So what the really smart northern shrike does is he impales that butterfly on that awful thorn, and then he waits for 3 days, that poison breaks down, and he goes ahead and eats them. So that's an amazing bird. I've never seen one. If you have, please let me know. I would be absolutely fascinated to see one of those guys. But do be careful if you come across one of these trees, because these thorns are really sharp, and they have been known to even go through the soles of your boots. So just be careful in observing these really awesome trees. We are ending our hike today in our apple orchard, and this apple orchard is important to Latodami because we do have an authentic Johnny apple seed tree right behind me here. So this is considered an authentic Johnny apple seed tree because it was grafted from an original Johnny apple seed tree that is still alive to this day. So we all know the story of Johnny Appleseed, but many people don't know that he's based on a real guy named John Chapman, who grew up in the Revolutionary War era. And what he did was he moved across west from Pennsylvania to Illinois, and he planted apple trees along the way. And he did this so that he could sell off this land to settlers. So this was really important for settlers as they moved west throughout the country, and they started discovering other areas that they can settle into. But these apples are not really the type that we're used to, grabbing an apple off the tree and taking a bite out of. Johnny liked to call these apples spitters because they were really bitter, and that was what you would do if you took a bite out of these apples. They weren't really used for that type of grabbing and eating. They were used more for hard cider and applejack. So that's something really cool that he did with his apple trees. But we can thank Johnny for a lot of the apple trees that we see in Pennsylvania now. And we can also thank him for planting those because apple trees actually need cross-pollination to produce viable fruit. So if you have a Golden Delicious, you cannot pollinate it with another Golden Delicious. You need to actually do something like a crab apple. So that's a really important and unique aspect of our apple trees that we have in this area all the way out west to Illinois. And it was said that when Johnny died in 1854, he actually had 1,200 acres of land. So that was pretty substantial for back then. So if you want to learn more about something like wetlands or maybe how to plant and grow your own apple tree, you can join us for one of our future programs. Otherwise, I hope you guys are staying safe and healthy, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much.